As the founding father of this great nation, I encourage you to celebrate President's Day drinking fine libations. But what should you drink? Stay tuned. Welcome to this week's episode, where we're going to explore wines to help us celebrate President's Day. And we're going to take a look at some wines that were actually served at the White House so we can drink them and feel as though we were invited guests at the White House. And I have to warn you, this week's episode, it's a little out of our price range, a little bit on some of these wines. But I think you'd still accommodate and have a wonderful President's Day with these three selections. And then stay tuned to the end and I'll share actually quite affordable, wonderful wine that President Obama served while he was in the White House. So let's take a look at each one of these wines to help us celebrate President's Day. So let's take a look at our very first wine, which is a Bordeaux. And you know, I picked this one because Thomas Jefferson is really known as sort of the father of American wines. And not only did he plant many of his own grapes at Monticello, but he traveled to Europe and was known for having a love of Bordeaux's and wines from Burgundy, of course, and wines from southern France. He was apparently very fond of white Côte d'Aron's and white Chateauneuf-du-Pape. So he really knew his wine, and apparently he brought back so many that it ended up being quite an issue on the nation's budget. So it's interesting that just before Jefferson was president, so let's say when George Washington and Adams were president, you know, the drink of the day back then wouldn't necessarily be Bordeaux or even Champagne like we know it now. It was much more about fortified wines. So those are Madeiras and port and sherries. And when you hear fortified wines, and I'm going to do a separate episode just on those, but if you hear fortified wines, it's really a wine that is sort of distilled with a neutral spirit, and it's almost always brandy. And this came about because, remember, way back then, 40s and 50s and 60s and 1770s, you know, and that the long shipping voyages, they put the wine in the casks, and by the time they got to the destination, they were pretty much just big barrels of vinegar. So they found by adding a neutral spirit to these barrels of wine, they actually got better, or at least were preserved. So at the time of Washington and Adams, etc., really was whiskey and sherry and Madeira and ports were really the drinks of the day. But by the time Jefferson came around, we were starting to get more into wine, and that's why I think he was probably such an avid wine consumer and an avid wine collector. So I wanted to pick this one because he really did like Bordeaux's. And I thought, you know what, this is a nice Bordeaux, Chateau Greysac. It's one of those you can get it at the grocery store, you can get it at a nice wine retailer, and you can open it. It's almost one, they kind of call it an everyday Bordeaux. It's mostly Merlot, and has a little bit of Cab and some other grapes. And remember, the French call their Bordeaux because that's where they're from, and they're almost always a blend. So it's going to be a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and a blend of Merlot and a blend of some other grapes. It's always going to be blended, so you won't see Bordeaux and Cabernet Sauvignon across the label because it'll be a blend. So I think this is a nice one for you to try. Very affordable, say around the 20 to maybe 25. You could almost always get it on sale for about $20. I've even found it at Trader Joe's. So if you've never had a French Bordeaux, I would love for you to start with this one and then let me know what you think. So to Jefferson, we're going to look at the Bordeaux's from France. Very nice option. So let's take a look at our second wine. And now we're going to Camelot. So this is the era of the Kennedys. And I wanted to pick a wine that President Kennedy and his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, served quite a bit. Wasn't at state dinners, we'll get to that in just a second, but this was apparently at his inauguration and thereafter, because Jacqueline Kennedy was a huge fan of Veuve Clicquot, and I believe the president probably was too. They loved their French champagne. So this French champagne, I would like for you to try because it's just a very classic champagne. It has that nice acidity, it's well balanced, it's going to have a little bit of pear and a little bit of that nice crisp green apple notes to it. It's not too yeasty and it's not too sweet, it's not too dry, even though it is brut. And remember, if you ever see brut, that means that's the dry one, right? So it's not going to be really any sweetness to it. It's a very dry wine. And obviously because it's from Champagne, France, that's why it can be called champagne. This one's a little on the expensive side. This one's between 35 and 45. But if you want to do a sort of nice celebration or a very special occasion and feel like you're in the Kennedy White House, the Veuve Clicquot, I think, is a very nice option for you. Well, before we go on to our third wine, which is a lovely Cabernet Sauvignon, I can't wait for you to try. It was sort of interesting when I was doing my research to learn that, the White House's wine cellar isn't very large. Apparently they just keep enough wines on hand to take care of, maybe some special small events and of course the immediate consumption of who's in the White House. And right now, President Trump doesn't drink a lot of wine, so they're probably in pretty good shape. But when they have big state dinners and grand affairs, they will order the wines and have them shipped to the White House. Another interesting fact in our research was that really when it comes to state dinners, so official state dinners, it's really nice that they only serve American wines and they have plenty from which to choose. So it sure is nice to know that when they have these state dinners and foreign dignitaries show up, they get to try all of our American wines. I think that was pretty nice. So with the third wine, this was served by President Gerald Ford while he was in the White House. And again, it's showcasing California. And, this wine, the BV from Rutherford, is just one of my favorite Cabernet Sauvignons. And it's plummy and it's heavy. It's not too tannic and it's not too acidic. It's when you want a very special occasion, it's around the $30 range, I would say, but you can find it at your grocery store, which is really quite nice. And you can also find it at fine retailers. It's just one of those classic Napa Valley houses and wineries that has just made wines that are really fantastic year after year. And I think one of the reasons I like it and why I want you to pay special attention is you notice it says it's from Rutherford. So way back when I was talking about in California and in Napa Valley is also distinguished in its smaller, what's called as AVAs, or little smaller areas of designation where the grapes are actually grown and where the wine is made. So you may have heard about Oakville or Spring Mountain or Howell Mountain, things of that nature. So Rutherford is a special, very small area in the Napa Valley, and it tends to be some of the wines that are my favorites. There's something that's sort of cocoa-y about it, and they call it Rutherford dust. It's sort of it's hard to put your finger on it, but I think when I taste the Cabernets from Rutherford, I just tend to like those. So I'd be very interested to hear what you think about if you like the wines from Rutherford in Napa Valley, or if you try this wine and see what you think. I would absolutely love to hear what you think. So as you can tell, the last two wines are a little bit of a splurge, right? A little out of our normal zone. So we're looking at, definitely in the 40 category, and our Bordeaux is pretty affordable, right around the $20 mark. And then we can still celebrate President's Day in style if we want. So what we really have are three excellent wines that showcase different periods in American history of presidents who served these in the White House. I don't know if Jefferson served the Chateau Greysac. I think this came afterwards. But we know he loved Bordeaux, and we know the Kennedys loved the Veuve Clicquot, and we know that President Gerald Ford served our BV Cabernet Sauvignon. Well, let's take a look at maybe what President Obama served while he was in the White House. So thank you for tuning into this week where we looked at wines either famous because of the presidents who liked them or because they were served at the White House. And just think, if you were the president, what wines would you like to serve? Imagine your budget and you didn't have one and you could serve some wine. So maybe leave some comments underneath our episode and see what wines you would love to serve if you were president of the United States. Wonderful choices. And I promised I would share with you one of the wines Barack Obama served. And he actually, even though he was kind of a beer drinker, he was actually known for serving some very nice wines at all of his White House functions. And one of them, isn't that nice? He stuck with California. And this is the Duckhorn Sauvignon Blanc. Now, if you haven't had a Duckhorn wine, I wouldn't say they're necessarily the most affordable. This Sauvignon Blanc is right around the $20 to $25 range. And they're very famous for their Merlot and their Cabernet Sauvignons. Get just critical acclaim. A very, very prestigious, nice winery from Napa Valley, California. And the Sauvignon Blanc, I'll send you some links below that are some other times we've talked about Sauvignon Blancs. A wonderful grape, crisp acidity, lots of citrus, usually reminds you of grapefruit and lemongrass. And this wine is sort of interesting because they also put some Semillon in it, which is interesting because it's very much like what the French do in their white Bordeaux. So it adds a little bit of sweetness, or gives it sort of that melon quality, makes it maybe not so harsh. It's a very nice one to try, and obviously I think whoever helped President Obama choose this wine knew what he or she was doing. It's a very nice wine to serve to your guests. So there we have the Duckhorn Sauvignon Blanc served in the Obama administration. Well, thank you again for being such loyal subscribers. I have heard from some people that it's a little difficult to figure out if they want to subscribe to a channel versus YouTube's asking them to stream things through the channel. And I want to make it very clear that it doesn't cost to be a subscriber to our channel. It's free. You just have to set up a YouTube account. So since you're watching, you already know that. But it sure would help me if you could explain to your friends and family and coworkers about my channel, about how it doesn't cost at all to become a YouTube subscriber to my channel. It just helps them figure out what I'm doing and what the episodes are, and they can look at back episodes, things of that nature. No charge on my channel whatsoever. So again, thank you, and all this talk about what to serve at the White House and all the wonderful state dinners they must be enjoying makes me thirsty, darn it. So until next week's episode, cheers everyone.